Please, let me stay tonight, she whispered. He gave her safety instead of the bed. The night was unusually quiet, almost too quiet for the part of the city he found himself in. Streetlights flickered gently, casting long, wavering shadows on the cracked pavement. He walked slowly, his hands tucked in the pockets of his worn jacket, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a stray dog. It was the kind of night that made people hurry home, drawing curtains tight and locking doors, yet he had no place he particularly needed to be. Sometimes he liked to walk when the city seemed asleep, when the world slowed down enough for him to think. That's when he noticed her. She was sitting on the curb near a corner, shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself smaller, hidden in the shadows. At first, he thought she might just be a passerby resting for a moment, but then he noticed the way her hands trembled slightly, how her eyes scanned the street with a cautious, searching look. She looked exhausted, not just tired from walking, but drained from something much heavier. He paused for a moment, unsure if he should approach. Normally, he didn't involve himself in strangers' business, but something about her made him stop. There was no confidence in her posture, no sense of safety in her movements. It wasn't fear from being in the city alone. He had walked these streets plenty at night. This was deeper, more urgent, a quiet plea that reached him before any words were spoken. She noticed him looking and quickly glanced away, tucking her hair behind her ear. The flicker of streetlight caught the edge of her face, revealing a faint tear that had dried but left its mark. He took a careful step closer, keeping his voice low, not wanting to startle her. "Hey," he said gently, "but are you okay?" She looked up at him, eyes wide but wary. For a moment, she didn't answer, just studied him as if measuring whether he was trustworthy. The silence stretched, and he felt the weight of it. Then, in a soft, almost broken whisper, she said, "Please, let me stay tonight." Her words hung in the air, fragile and trembling, like a leaf caught in a breeze. He sensed immediately that this wasn't just about needing a place to sleep, but her request carried more than the desire for comfort. It carried fear, uncertainty, and the quiet hope that someone, anyone, would care enough to help. He knelt slightly to meet her gaze more directly, careful to not invade her space. I don't have a bed to offer," he said slowly, "but I can make sure you're safe." She blinked at him, confusion and relief warring across her face. Bag. Safety. That word, simple as it was, seemed heavier than any blanket or pillow could be tonight. Her body relaxed just a little, the tension in her shoulders softening as she realized he wasn't dismissing her, judging her, or turning her away.
He had heard her, really heard her, and that was something rare in a world that often looked the other way.
For a moment they just sat there in silence, the sounds of the city around them fading into a background hum. He didn't need to ask her story. Her exhaustion, the faint marks of worry on her face, and the way she clutched her coat tightly told him everything he needed to know. She had been running, not necessarily from someone specific, but from a feeling, a situation, a danger she couldn't face alone. And here she was, hoping that a stranger could somehow give her what she couldn't find on her own. He stood up and offered her his hand, a simple gesture of support. "Come with me," he said softly. "I can make sure no one can hurt you right now." She hesitated, looking around as if the night itself might swallow her whole if she moved. But something in his calm tone, the steady way he held her gaze, reassured her. Slowly, almost cautiously, she took his hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly, but he held them with quiet steadiness. They walked together step by step along the quiet streets. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to fill the silence with meaningless chatter. Instead, he matched his pace to hers, letting her feel that she wasn't alone, that someone could watch over her without judgment. without demand. Every once in a while she looked up at him, curiosity mixed with relief in her eyes, and he simply nodded or gave a small, encouraging smile. He noticed little things about her. How her shoes were worn, how her coat was slightly too big, like it had been borrowed or handed down. The faint bruise on her wrist caught his attention, but he didn't comment. He knew she needed to feel safe before she could even begin to explain, and pressing for details too soon could undo all the fragile trust that was forming. They reached a quieter area, away from the main roads, where the shadows were softer and the streetlights more reliable. He gestured toward a small, empty park nearby.
"We can sit here for a bit," he said. "You're safe."
No one can come near you. She sank onto the edge of a bench, still clutching her coat. For the first time that night, she let herself exhale fully, the tension in her body slowly ebbing away. The corners of her lips quivered, almost forming a smile, though she quickly turned her face to hide it. He didn't rush her. He didn't speak. He simply sat a short distance away, keeping a protective presence between her and the rest of the world. The night stretched on, long and quiet, yet strangely comforting.
The simple fact that she wasn't alone, that someone had chosen to stay with her when the world could have ignored her, mattered more than any warm bed ever could.
Her whispered request for shelter had been answered, not in the way she had expected, but in a way that mattered far more. He had given her safety, and in that moment, that was enough. As the city slept, they sat together in silence, connected by a fragile thread of trust. The stars above were hidden by clouds, but the faint glow of the streetlights was enough to cast soft shadows around them, creating a small bubble of protection. Here, on this quiet night, she felt seen, and he felt the quiet responsibility of standing guard over someone who needed it. And though neither of them spoke much after that, both knew that this night, this small act of care would stay with them forever. Sometimes, he realized, safety could be more powerful than comfort. And sometimes, a quiet presence, unwavering and patient, could be the only thing a person needed to survive the darkness. The night air was cold, but it didn't matter as much now. She had someone with her. A stranger, yes, but someone who seemed genuinely willing to help. Sitting on the worn wooden bench in the quiet park, she wrapped her coat tightly around herself, trying to gather warmth and comfort. He stayed a few feet away, maintaining a careful distance, aware that she needed space as much as she needed protection. For several minutes, they just sat in silence. The city around them was asleep, and the distant hum of traffic felt like it belonged to another world, far away from the tension that still clung to her. Barash. Her hands trembled less now, but her eyes remained alert, scanning the shadows as if danger could appear at any moment. He noticed, of course, every small movement, every subtle sign of unease registered in his mind. He knew that fear like hers didn't go away quickly. It had to be earned, slowly, piece by piece. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why? Why are you staying here with me?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her calmly, choosing his words carefully. "Because you need someone to make sure you're safe," he said simply. "That's all. No one should face a night like this alone." She considered this, the words settling into her mind. No judgment, no questions, no suspicion. Just a simple human act of kindness. She wasn't used to this. Most people, she thought, would have turned away, left her to figure out the night on her own. Yet here he was, offering his time, his presence, and most importantly, his attention.
Her gaze drifted downward. I
don't usually ask for help, she admitted. I've always tried to handle things on my own, but tonight I didn't know what else to do. He nodded, understanding more in her few words than she realized. He knew the kind of courage it took to admit vulnerability, especially for someone who had spent much of her life relying only on herself. "It's okay," he
he said. Sometimes we need help, and sometimes asking for it is the hardest part.
You did the right thing by coming here. A small shiver ran through her, whether from cold or emotion he couldn't tell. Without a word, he reached into his bag and pulled out a spare scarf he always carried for moments like this. It wasn't much. Just a simple piece of cloth, but he draped it gently around her shoulders. Here, he said softly. This might help a little. She looked up at him, startled by the gesture. Thank you, she whispered. It was simple, but there was sincerity in her tone, a gratitude deeper than just words. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to feel a little relief. They sat together longer, and slowly the tension in her body began to ease. He didn't press for details, didn't ask where she came from or what had brought her here. He knew that trust couldn't be forced, that safety wasn't just about being protected physically, it was about feeling seen, respected, and understood without pressure. After a while, she began to speak, her voice hesitant at first. I had somewhere to go, but it wasn't safe anymore. I thought I could make it through the night, but I couldn't. Her words faltered, caught in emotion she couldn't name. He listened, nodding occasionally, letting her talk as if simply being heard could make the night less heavy. I understand, he said quietly. You're not alone anymore.
That's the first step toward feeling safe again.
She glanced at him, studying his calm demeanor, and something in her eyes softened. For someone who had faced fear and uncertainty alone for so long, this quiet presence was grounding.
She realized that safety wasn't about walls, locks, or a bed. It was about knowing someone was willing to stay with you when the world seemed uncertain. Minutes passed, like hours, yet there was no rush. In this space between shadows and streetlights, a fragile trust began to form. She began to talk a little more, sharing small things about herself, her favorite books, a childhood memory, even something as simple as the way she liked her tea. Each word was tentative, but each word was a thread connecting her to him, weaving a small web of understanding and human connection. He responded with gentle interest, asking questions that were easy to answer and never intrusive. Bent. That sounds wonderful, he would say. Or, I can see why you love that. His voice was calm, steady, and without judgment, giving her a sense of stability she hadn't felt in a long time. Time moved slowly, but the park began to feel less intimidating. The shadows were still there, and the streets beyond were still dark, but he stayed alert, scanning for anything that might approach, yet never showing fear or panic. It was a subtle message to her. The world could still be dangerous, but she was no longer facing it alone. She realized that night that she didn't have to hide her fear anymore. She could show it, speak it, and still be safe. The simple act of someone choosing to stay with her, protecting her in small but meaningful ways, was more comforting than she had imagined possible. Hours passed, though it was hard to tell how many.
They moved slowly, sometimes walking to stay warm, sometimes sitting again on the bench.
Bye. He offered her water from his bottle, suggested small stretches to loosen her stiff muscles, and occasionally shared a quiet, light-hearted observation about the city to ease the heaviness of the night. It was nothing major, just small gestures, but each one built a sense of normalcy, a sense that even in a strange and frightening night, kindness and patience could exist. At one point, she paused and looked up at him, eyes reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude.
You didn't have to stay with me, she said softly. He shook his head.
I know, he replied simply, but I wanted to? Yes. Some things matter more than comfort or convenience. Your safety matters. Those words lingered with her, echoing in her mind in a way that few words ever had. She realized that asking for shelter wasn't the only thing she had needed tonight. She had needed someone to see her,
to acknowledge her fear and to give her protection without expectation or judgment. That was what he had given her, and it felt more valuable than anything else. By the time dawn began to hint at the edges of the sky, painting the horizon with soft shades of pink and orange, she felt a strange kind of peace. Not complete relief. Fear still lingered as it always would, but enough relief to take the first steps toward safety, toward healing, toward hope. She realized that night that safety could come in many forms, and sometimes it wasn't a bed or a roof over one's head. Brace. Sometimes it was simply the presence of someone willing to stay, to watch, and to care without conditions. When the first birds began to stir, she finally allowed herself a small smile. It was faint and tentative, but it was there. She looked at him, and though the night was over, the memory of his quiet presence, his patience, and his unwavering care would remain with her forever. She understood now that the night had been harsh, the streets dangerous, but she had found something unexpected: trust, compassion, and safety in the most human form. And though she didn't know what the next day would bring, she felt stronger than she had when the night began. Not because her problems had disappeared, but because she had learned that in a world that could be cruel and uncertain, there were people willing to stay, to protect, and to care, even when it wasn't easy. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting soft golden light over the quiet streets. Shadows stretched and slowly disappeared, and the city was waking up to a new day. But for her, the morning didn't mean safety had fully arrived. The events of the night were still heavy on her mind, and the fear that had chased her through the streets hadn't completely faded. She shivered slightly in the cool morning air, not just from the cold, but from the lingering tension that came with having been alone for so long in a dangerous world. He noticed immediately. His eyes, calm and attentive, watched her carefully, reading every subtle movement. The way she clutched her coat tighter, the way her eyes darted to the empty streets as if searching for threats, he understood. She wasn't just tired. She was still on edge, carrying invisible scars that had nothing to do with the night, but with a lifetime of needing to fend for herself. "You're still cold," he said quietly. "Here. Try to keep moving. That might help a little." He gestured toward a small path that led to a quiet square, free of traffic and noise. She hesitated, glancing at him, then nodded slowly. Pay. His presence, steady and non-intrusive, gave her a small courage she didn't know she had. As they walked, she began to open up, though carefully, in small pieces. She talked about the fear that had driven her out of her apartment, the feeling of being trapped in a situation she couldn't control, the anxiety that had built over days, weeks, maybe even months. She didn't go into all the details, but she didn't need to. The weight in her voice, the tremor in her hands, the distant look in her eyes. He understood everything without needing words.
He walked beside her, listening without interrupting, letting her speak at her own pace.
Occasionally he offered small reassurances, but never pushed for information she wasn't ready to share.
It's okay,
He said gently. You're safe now. That's what matters first. Bye. Her eyes softened as she looked at him, and she realized that this was the first time in a long while that she felt someone truly understood her. Not in a way that judged or criticized, but in a quiet, patient, human way. She could feel her shoulders relax slightly, and for the first time in hours, she took a deep, steadying breath. The morning air carried birdsong and the faint smell of fresh bread from nearby bakeries opening for the day. For a moment the world seemed normal, almost ordinary, as if the night's fear had been nothing but a distant dream. But the memories lingered, pressing down gently but persistently, reminding her that danger and fear weren't so easily forgotten. She paused, glancing around at the quiet square. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there, she admitted, her voice barely audible. He shook his head. smiling faintly.
You always do. But sometimes even the strongest people need someone to stand with them. That's all I did. I just stood with you.
She considered his words, feeling their truth. There was no heroics, no dramatic rescue, no grand gesture. Just presence, patience, just someone willing to care enough to stay, even when it wasn't convenient. It was the simplest act, but it carried more weight than anything else could. As they continued walking, he noticed the faint signs of exhaustion still etched on her face, dark circles under her eyes, tense muscles, a careful, measured way of moving. He knew she needed more than safety in that moment. She needed reassurance that she could relax, even if just a little, that the world could be navigated without constant fear. They stopped at a small bench under a tree, where the morning sun filtered through the leaves in gentle patterns. She sank onto it, letting her body sag in relief. And he sat across from her, giving her space but staying close enough to respond if she needed him.
You don't have to talk if you don't want to, he said softly. I can just sit here with you.
Sometimes that's enough. For the first time, she allowed herself to simply breathe, to let the tension drain from her body. The sound of his calm voice, the steady rhythm of his presence, and the quiet of the early morning created a space where fear could be replaced, even slightly, with trust. Slowly, she began to tell him a little more, small details about her life, the people she had relied on in the past, and the moments when she had felt vulnerable and alone. Each story was short, careful, as if she was testing him, checking whether he would respond with judgment or disbelief. He didn't. He responded with patience, empathy, and subtle encouragement, giving her the freedom to speak and the freedom to stop whenever she felt uncomfortable. She realized then that this was different from anyone she had met before. Most people she had encountered in difficult times had either ignored her, judged her, or tried to fix things in ways that made her feel smaller. But he was different. He wasn't trying to control her, guide her, or solve her problems. He was simply there, sharing the weight of the night, sharing a small part of his strength without demanding anything in return. Time passed slowly, marked only by the rising sun and the increasing activity in the streets. But for her, it felt like a lifetime had compressed into those quiet hours. She felt safer than she had in months, maybe even years. The fear that had driven her from her home was still present, lingering in the corners of her mind. But it was no longer overwhelming. She had someone with her, someone who had chosen to stay when it would have been easier to walk away. But at one point, she looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. "Why do you do this for strangers?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. He shrugged slightly, looking thoughtful. "Because someone did it for me once," he said simply. "And I know what it feels like to need someone and find no one there. I want to be that someone for someone else, even if it's just for one night." Her eyes softened. There was a quiet weight in his words, a truth that resonated with her deeply. She realized that acts of kindness didn't need to be grand to matter. Sometimes the simplest gesture, the choice to stay, to watch over, to protect, was more powerful than anything else. As the morning stretched on, they remained in the square, letting the warmth of the sun slowly replace the chill of the night. She felt her body relax, her mind beginning to untangle from the tension that had bound it for so long. She understood that safety wasn't just a place or a locked door. It was a presence, a careful attention, a promise that someone would be there when the night seemed too dark to face alone. By the time the streets were fully alive with the sounds of the day, she felt a fragile sense of hope. It wasn't complete, not yet, but it was enough to take a first step forward. She realized that the night had been harsh, and the city could still be dangerous. But she had found something unexpected: trust, compassion, and care in a world that often felt indifferent. And as she sat there feeling the sun's warmth on her face, she understood that sometimes the most important thing a person could give was not a solution or a bed, but a quiet, steady presence that let someone know they were not alone. That realization, more than anything else, gave her strength to face the coming day, knowing that even in fear and uncertainty, there could be safety, patience, and human kindness. The morning sun had climbed higher, turning the quiet streets into a soft golden maze of light and shadow. But despite the warm glow, she still felt a thread of tension that refused to leave her. The city was waking up, people were moving, cars were passing, and yet the sense of being watched lingered in her mind. It was subtle, almost invisible, but she felt it like a weight pressing against her chest.
He noticed it immediately. Her posture stiffened, her eyes darted to every passing figure, and her breathing grew shallow for just a moment before she tried to steady it.
He stayed beside her, walking with the same careful, calm rhythm, letting her feel that he was there, not just physically, but as a shield against whatever she feared.
"You're tense," he said quietly, glancing at her without any judgment.
It's okay. We'll take it slow. Bah. She nodded, trying to appear calm, though her hands fidgeted with the hem of her coat. She didn't have to explain. He understood. Bah. He had spent the night learning how to read her small signals, noticing the moments when her guard went up, the tiny signs that fear had not fully left her. They moved through the streets cautiously, choosing quieter paths, shaded alleyways, and small parks over busy roads. But every few steps he would glance around, always alert, always making sure that no one approached them who might cause harm. There was no panic in his movements, no frantic gestures. Just calm, quiet vigilance that made her feel safer than she had in weeks. At one point, a man on the street glanced their way a little too long, lingering near the corner of a building. Her body stiffened immediately, and he caught it instantly. Without saying a word, he adjusted his pace, keeping slightly between her and the stranger, moving in a way that was protective without being confrontational. She noticed the gesture and felt a small surge of relief. It was subtle, but it told her that he had her back, that she didn't have to face danger alone. I've been running for a while, she admitted quietly. Her voice low, as if speaking aloud made the fear more real.
Not just tonight.
But for months, maybe years. I thought I could handle everything, but I was wrong.
Breaths. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer empty reassurances or platitudes.
Beck. He simply walked beside her, letting her share at her own pace. Every word she spoke seemed to lighten the weight on her chest slightly, and slowly, the thread of fear began to loosen. They reached a small, almost hidden park, its edges lined with tall bushes and a few trees. It was quiet, almost private, and he suggested they rest there for a moment, wrapping her coat tightly around herself. And he stood nearby, vigilant but relaxed enough for her to sense she was safe. "You don't have to face this alone," he said softly, his eyes scanning the streets beyond the park.
Bay. Even when it feels like danger is everywhere, you're not by yourself anymore. She looked at him, her eyes wide with the realization of his meaning.
Breaths. Safety wasn't just about being out of harm's way. It was about someone being willing to stay with her, to guide her, to keep watch when her own strength faltered. Yes. That kind of protection was rare, almost precious, and she felt a quiet gratitude for his presence that went deeper than words could express. As the morning stretched on, they continued moving through the city, choosing quieter routes, avoiding the busier streets. But occasionally he would gently guide her away from potential trouble, always careful not to frighten her further. Each small action built trust, showing her that his concern was real, that his focus was entirely on her safety. At one point, a shadow shifted near an alley, and she froze. Her eyes widened, and she instinctively stepped closer to him. Bay. Without hesitation, he moved to shield her, subtly positioning himself between her and the alley. His presence calm, but firm. She could feel the assurance radiating from him. He was not panicking, not overreacting, but he was ready to act if necessary.
It's okay, he whispered. I'm here.
Nothing will happen while I'm with you. She swallowed hard, letting the tension in her shoulders ease slightly, and nodded. Her fear was still there, lingering, but it no longer controlled her. She realized that danger didn't have to dominate her mind because someone else was willing to take it on in her place. That thought, simple as it was, gave her a sense of relief she hadn't felt in a long time. But as they walked, he noticed how she began to relax in small ways. The way her steps became steadier, the way she stopped scanning the streets so intensely, the tiny exhale that seemed to release weeks of pent-up fear. Each movement told him that his presence was helping, that his choice to stay with her and prioritize her safety over comfort was making a difference. They paused near a small cafe just opening for the day.
The warm smell of coffee and baked goods drifted through the air.
She hesitated, unsure if she wanted to enter, still wary of being in public.
He noticed her hesitation and didn't push.
Instead, he waited, patient, allowing her to make her own choice. The respect in his calm stance was more reassuring than anything he could have said. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Baby." "Just for a few minutes," she whispered. They entered quietly, choosing a corner where they could sit without drawing much attention. But he stayed slightly behind her, keeping her comfortable while giving her space to feel safe. The small act of waiting, of giving her control, was another way he continued to protect her. She sipped her warm drink, the taste of coffee and milk calming her senses. For the first time that morning, she felt a small measure of normalcy, a fleeting sense of routine and comfort. It was subtle, but it mattered. Even in a city that could be unpredictable and dangerous, these small moments of care were grounding her, letting her feel human again. Bay. As they left the cafe, the streets were brighter, filled with the sounds of people starting their day. Yet the vigilance didn't stop. He guided her through safe paths, avoiding any streets where crowds or potential threats might appear. Every step, every careful movement reinforced the trust between them. She was learning that safety was not just a physical space. It was a state of being, created by someone willing to act with patience, care, and attention. By the time they reached a quieter residential area, her steps were steadier, her eyes calmer, and her shoulders less tense. And she realized that he had kept her safe not through force or confrontation, but through quiet, constant awareness and a readiness to act if needed. That was what true protection felt like. Sitting on a small stone wall near the end of their route, she finally let herself speak more freely. I don't know how to thank you," she admitted. "I didn't think anyone would care enough to stay with me. Not really." He smiled faintly. "You don't have to thank me. You've been brave all along. I just made sure you weren't facing the world alone tonight and this morning. That's enough." Her eyes softened, gratitude and relief mixing with a fragile hope she hadn't felt in a long time. She realized that he had done more than just protect her physically. He had given her something far rarer. He had restored a sense of trust, a sense that kindness existed even in a harsh world, a sense that she could survive the darkness without being crushed by it. And in that moment she understood the truth of what he had been offering from the start. It wasn't a bed. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't even words of reassurance alone. It was something deeper, something more powerful. His presence, his patience, his unwavering commitment to her safety. That was the gift he had given, and it mattered more than anything else could have. The day was now fully awake. Sunlight streamed over the streets, turning ordinary walls and buildings into warm patches of gold. The city had transformed from the quiet, tense world of the night into a bustling place filled with people going about their lives. For her, though, the morning had not yet completely erased the memories of fear and uncertainty. But now, with him beside her, the fear had been replaced with something far more powerful: hope. They walked together slowly, choosing safe streets, keeping to paths that were less crowded, and avoiding areas that could trigger anxiety. She felt a strange comfort in his presence, a quiet reassurance that no matter what obstacles or dangers remained in the world, she was not facing them alone. Each step, each glance, each small act of care reminded her that kindness could exist even in moments of fear. "You're going to be okay," he said softly, reading the lingering tension in her body. "The worst is behind you now. You're safe, and people can help you from here." She nodded, though her eyes still held a hint of uncertainty. "I hope so."
I've spent so long thinking I could handle everything myself.
"I didn't realize how much it could take out of me." He smiled faintly, not in judgment but in understanding. "You've been brave," he said. "It's okay to accept help sometimes. It doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." For the first time since the night began, she felt the weight of that truth. She had spent so long hiding her fear, running from problems alone, and protecting herself in ways that exhausted her. But now, she had learned that safety and support could come from someone willing to stay, to listen, and to care without conditions. That realization gave her a quiet, unshakable strength. They turned a corner and approached a small building that looked familiar to her. It was a place where she knew she could find real help, a friend, family member, or a safe place arranged through someone who could provide care. Her steps slowed, and she paused outside the door, feeling a mixture of relief and nervousness. "This is where I need to go," she said quietly, glancing at him. "I can't go any further with you, but thank you. But I don't know what I would have done without you." He nodded, understanding the significance of the moment.
"You've made it this far," he said. "That's the hardest part."
"From here, you can let other people help you, and that's okay. Remember, needing help doesn't make you less strong. You've already proven how strong you are." She felt a lump in her throat, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and lingering emotion. "I'll never forget this," she said softly. "Not what you did, not how you stayed with me, not even your words." He smiled faintly, his presence calm and reassuring. "Then remember this. Safety is sometimes more important than comfort. And being there for someone, truly being there, can change their world even if it seems small at the time." She nodded again, taking a deep, steadying breath. The streets behind her were now filled with morning activity, but she felt protected in a way she had never experienced before. Her fear had not completely disappeared, but it had been replaced by a new understanding, that she could face challenges with courage, especially when someone stood by her side.
He stayed with her a moment longer, ensuring she was ready to enter the building safely.
She looked up at him, her eyes filled with emotion, and smiled faintly. "Goodbye," she whispered. But the word carried more than farewell. It carried respect, gratitude, and a quiet bond formed in the darkest hours of the night. "Despair." He nodded, giving her a reassuring glance. "Goodbye."
And remember, you're never truly alone.
There's always someone willing to stand by you when you need it most. As she stepped inside, he watched her go, a mixture of relief and satisfaction settling over him. He knew that his presence had made a difference, not because of grand gestures, but because of the quiet acts of patience, attention, and care he had shown. Sometimes the world needed someone to offer safety instead of comfort, and that choice, he realized, could change lives in ways no one could measure. The streets were alive now, filled with people who were unaware of the night's quiet drama. But for her, the memory of his calm presence, his unwavering care, and his protective actions would remain forever. She had learned an important truth, that even in a harsh and unpredictable world, human kindness could provide strength, courage, and safety when it mattered most. Walking away from the building, he felt a quiet satisfaction. Not pride, but a gentle understanding of what had transpired. He had not offered a bed, not provided comfort in the way she had initially requested, but he had given something far more essential: protection, trust, and safety. In doing so, he had shown her that someone could care without expectation, that human connection could be a powerful shield against fear, and that even a stranger could change the course of a night, and perhaps a life, simply by being present. Bask. She would remember the night forever. The cold streets, the silent park, the cautious steps through empty alleys, and the way he had walked beside her. Always vigilant, always patient. She would remember the feeling of being seen without judgment, of having someone's attention entirely devoted to her safety, and of discovering that it was possible to trust again, even if just a little. And as she finally settled into the safe environment she had reached, surrounded by people who could help her in ways he could not, she carried with her a newfound strength. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and vulnerability, but she had survived. But not alone, but with someone who had reminded her of the simplest truth, that safety, kindness, and human presence were sometimes more valuable than anything else in the world. And in the quiet aftermath, he walked away, unseen by the bustling city around him, satisfied that a life had been touched, a fear had been eased, and a human bond, fragile yet strong, had been quietly forged in the darkness of the night. Sometimes, he thought, as he disappeared into the streets, the smallest acts of care could leave the deepest marks, and tonight had been proof of that truth.